Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Um, Before we get started, I figured we would just do a little introduction of who we all are up here. My name is Colin Levy. I am General Counsel of Malbec. I'm also a pretty prolific writer about legal tech on LinkedIn and on AI. And I am the moderator of this hopefully very engaging conversation about AI governance and how to put together an AI governance program. I'll let the other two speakers introduce themselves, and then we'll get going with the discussion.
Thank you. My name is Lene Campos. I am in-house at Delta Airlines, and I lead our AI governance program.
Hey everybody. Oh, that's loud. My name is Timur Ghaznavi, and I am the head of Connexo, which is an alternative legal service provider within the global law firm Evershed Sutherland. So I get to see this from both a sales side, I get to see it from an internal law firm side, and I get to see it as somebody that is buying a lot of legal tech, and then also advising a lot of my clients on how to do this. So try to bring that perspective today.
Well, great. Happy to have you both here. You're definitely primed for this discussion. So I want to start with the question that I'm sure many of you probably have in the audience, which is, what exactly is AI governance? What are we talking about when we refer to this thing called AI governance, and why should we care about it?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take this first. When I think about AI governance, I think about the tension between the risk that the technology presents, which you may have heard some about in other sessions. It can hallucinate, it can be unfair, it can be biased, it can do all of these bad things. But on the other hand, we've got tons of incredible vendors and suppliers of technology here, and you see all of the great things that it can do as well. And so to me, AI governance is finding the middle ground and making sure that you're managing and mitigating those risks in a way that's appropriate and in a way that your company and its leadership are comfortable with, but then also making sure that you are empowering and enabling your companies, your clients, and customers to really achieve their objectives.
Yeah, and I like to think about AI governance as general rules of the road, right? So what is it that you want to get to? So you're trying to get from point A to point B, maybe an outcome. How do you want to get there, and where do we want you to stop, and what happens if that goes potentially wrong, right? So, and I was talking to our panelists earlier today, and I was thinking about this from the perspective of rules of the road started with us just saying, hey, we're going to be walking from point A to point B, and what happens if it goes wrong? Maybe we bump into each other. Not a huge deal, right? So, and it started going a little bit faster as we moved into cars, and we're essentially saying, well, now we're moving at much, much higher speeds. There's more of us on these actual roads, so we need stop signs, and we need some, maybe more than that, we need traffic lights, and we need general other rules and directions of what's happening, right? And borrowing from my esteemed panelists here, I feel like we're now going airborne and we're into maybe Delta jets that are going around, and those stop signs and those traffic lights are not going to be the things that are always working for us, right? We need air traffic control, and we need different ways of thinking about new paths of getting from point A to point B. And if we're building governance back for us walking and stop signs, we're already behind, right? So we have to start thinking about what is it from a principle framework standpoint that we really want to do, and then build for where we want to go, as that's how I'm making sense of it in my mind, at least.
So with that kind of as the foundation, the next kind of logical question in my mind at least is, how do we get people to buy into this idea of AI governance, and that, so many people are already using it in so many different ways, sometimes not even realizing what they're doing, to be honest. So in an organization, and I realize it's kind of a big question given that different organizations of different sizes have different challenges, how do you get people on board with governance and understanding it as this needs to be a priority for whatever reason? How do you go about doing that?
So one of the challenges that emerged early on when people started talking about AI governance committees, at least this was my experience in Delta, is that these committees were popping up in all different parts of the company. So you'd see IT pop up in AI governance committee, you'd see compliance pop up one, you'd see them pop up in all of these different places. And one of the things that was really important in the beginning was to get everybody together on the same page, make sure that we had cross-functional representation, and make sure legal was at the table. For some reason, sometimes people don't want to invite us. But I literally this week had to, I put a slide together saying, you have to be on board because there's regulatory obligations that underlie this. And so there's the EU AI Act, there's the Colorado AI Act, there's, state laws and comprehensive laws in countries all around the world. And this is the risk that would be presented to our company if we don't comply with these frameworks that we're putting in place, if we don't say that we're going to be responsible in terms of how we're using AI. But it's also been really helpful to partner with our compliance team and to say, we have adopted ethical principles as a company. Everybody sitting in here very likely has a code of ethics for the company that they work for. And so rather than saying, I'm going to create brand new principles that have nothing to do with the principles that everybody else already, talks about every day, we say this is what our culture is built on, really taking those and kind of extrapolating those and saying, okay, well, we say in our code of ethics that we're not going to discriminate. Let's not do it with AI either. And let's, incorporate that into responsible AI principles. So that's kind of what our journey has been. And it wasn't assumed early on necessarily that you had to do AI governance just because it was a good thing to do. We had to establish that narrative.
Yeah, and for us, we're a little bit different in the sense that we're all purely client serving in this sense. So we started with a policy, just first and foremost, right? Of like generally, what is it that we say we're going to do? Let's actually do it. Here's some enablement. Here's what you generally shouldn't do, right? We started with that probably like 2.5, 3 years ago at this point. But because we work with all of our clients, we then had to also say, well, what do our clients want us to do through our outside counsel guidelines, right? That actually probably had a little bit more weight than what came from a central location from us, because we were like, what we want to do is one thing, but client A is saying, don't use AI at all. The other one is saying, tell me exactly how you're using it and why you aren't using these tools. So that started to drive a lot more of the conversation. And that was a bit of an evolution for us as a firm to say, okay, well, we need everybody on the page because I'm not serving just one client at a time. I'm talking to 7 different ones, right? So I'm thinking about it from a perspective of, all right, well, what are the base level considerations that I need to have as I go into any AI tool? And I think the only other thing I think about from this perspective is that conversation that happens, it can't be a one-time conversation. We're moving so fast, and even those client outside counsel guidelines are changing. My vendors are using different AI constantly, so I'm constantly having to have this ongoing conversation with lawyers, paralegals, technologists, business developers, and saying, here's our approach and that committee approach.
So those are really helpful insights, and I think that gives a lot of foundational principles to work off of. But if you take those and then move on to actually building the program itself, given the dynamics of the world and how fast things are moving, and organizations that are likely not moving as fast as the world is, and certainly not as fast as technology and AI is, something's got to give a little bit. So how do you go about building a program with so much uncertainty kind of swirling around in the environment in which you're working in?
I think you just have to start somewhere, right? And I keep going back to this principle of like progress, not perfection. So for us, that was understanding what does our world look like, in the sense of, well, what tools do we have? And that's not a start from scratch list. That's a going to our IT department saying, what are all our SaaS tools? And within those, what are the general features? Because everybody here, your procurement group probably has run a SIG or SIG Lite vendor due diligence, or your privacy team has done this, or a cyber team has done this. So there's a consideration there of like, you already know generally what you have, and you've already put some general frameworks around where your data is and what you can and cannot do with it, right? So you're not starting from zero. You're starting from a pretty decent standpoint, but now you're thinking about, well, what risk comes if I do something different with that data? I think that's where we started to go to. But anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been really helpful for us in our journey is just making sure to leverage relationships, establish relationships, leverage them. One important thing, like AI governance is a team sport. So I mentioned we've got IT, we've got information security, we've got procurement, we've got legal compliance, I've got a committee with probably 20 different people on it, and really making sure that you hone the art of influencing without authority, and making sure that you are helping those people look good when they report back to their leadership. The one thing that makes it a little bit easier is like AI is very sexy right now, so everybody wants to be somehow involved in some project that has AI associated with it. I feel really badly for the folks that had to roll out like GDPR compliance and in the day, and they probably had to twist some arms to get people involved. But generally, people are really willing to say, if you can articulate how governance can help them achieve their objectives that have been flowed down to them from their senior leaders, they usually will get on board pretty easily.
That's a good point, because we were thinking about it as well. As I think oftentimes I hear from my clients is their clients, their business users are saying, we keep going to legal and they're constantly the brakes of how fast we want to go. Well, a car cannot go fast unless it has brakes, because you don't feel like you can ever slow down, right? If we can show that we're not only providing the brakes to let you go fast and slow, we're also providing the general guardrails. So now you're going to be enabled to go do things that you constantly had to come to legal to do it, right? So if you start to provide those enablement components of it, that business team is going to move faster than ever, and they're going to look at you and be like, this was wonderful working with legal. They actually provided the guardrails. I'm now moving faster than ever. And that changes the conversation, I think, even from a legal department and legal ops professionals, to be like, I'm not just cost reduction or risk, I am also business enablement as well.
Yeah, so great points. Especially the relationship building point, because I find that large part of my job, large part of likely all of our jobs has less to do with the kind of the substance of our job, but more with managing people and personalities and understanding how they work and aligning with those ways. So to that point, you spoke earlier about a committee. What immediately comes to my mind is, all right, committee sounds wonderful in theory, but then you have all these people in a room that all want different things. How do you get everyone aligned without getting in the way of them wanting to do what they need to do / want to do, and managing the fact that because AI is so sexy, everyone wants to experiment with it, but you don't want to just shove the governance piece to the side. So how do you go, I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to that experience.
So that's the magic of it. That's the part that I find personally really exciting. We intentionally invited a representative from our enterprise strategy team to sit on the committee to challenge us in that way. We want them to push on us and say, is this really required from a governance perspective? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. If it is required from a governance perspective, can we do it more simply, faster, more cheaply, in different ways? And so I really welcome that tension and that conflict, because it makes us better and it delivers a better outcome to the organization. And it's really important because also they just won't invite you if you don't figure out how to really make it about enabling what they're trying to accomplish. You'll find out tools have been rolled out and you never knew anything about them. And folks are just trying to do their jobs. So you've got to kind of figure out how to manage through that.
No notes. I agree.
So, given sort of these dynamics, assuming you've established kind of what you want for your governance program, how do you both codify it but also enforce it? Because the problem I see at least is, great, you've got the principles, they're on a piece of paper somewhere, that's great. Principles on a piece of paper go in a drawer, never to be looked at again, but they become embodied to some degree in some sense. But AI has moved faster than that. You have to sort of match that dynamic. So how do you go about doing that and ensuring that you are meeting the needs of the moment, but also ensuring that you're doing about it in a pragmatic, controlled, systematic way So I would love to hear your collective thoughts. Timur, go right ahead.
Yeah, so if the question, I think, if I'm understanding it right, like how do we take that policy and make it real for people, right? So I think the policy is great, but the problem with just the policy is that humans have to actually follow it. And that doesn't always work well if we look back at history and every regulatory inquiry that has basically come up that said you had a policy, but you're not actually doing what you said you were doing. So I look at it a couple different ways. There is the constant education and training component of it. I see this just as, I'm constantly talking to my partners, and I can tell them 3 times or 4 times or 5 times, and they probably don't hear me or understand what I do. So it's like something I think humans have to hear things 7 times before they can actually like understand it and keep it moving forward. But even then, that's not enough. So constant education. But then that's not it, right? Then there's what I like, the trust but verify. Like, I'm sure you're not going to take that client confidential data and then go put it in ChatGPT. But just in case, I'm also going to use our DLP tools that show me what data is leaving or not leaving my environment. And we're also going to use these potential guardrail tools that show me what is actually being input into any of these LLMs, right? Almost as another filter. So that's a bit of more of an enforcement mechanism that you have there as well. And then, Colin, you and I were talking about this as well. It's like, we are eventually going to hit a point where our human capacity is not keeping up at the speed at which AI is changing. And all of this is happening. So we're eventually going to get to this point where I think we're getting there, where we're going to have to use AI almost to help us govern AI, in reading all of those different changes that are coming from those vendor clauses, in scanning that regulatory horizon and seeing like what is about to come down here, right? Or seeing what is potentially going out there and sentiment of what we're talking about internally. So that's exciting. I don't have the answer to that part of it yet, but I think it's like a people piece of it. There's a technology piece of it, and there's like a general process of where you want to bring in.
Yeah. One of the kind of interesting things about this question is, when you think about AI, you think about forward-looking, how do we anticipate, how do we innovate, how do we change in ways that we've never had to change before. But your question really requires kind of a back to basics type of analysis. And so the Department of Justice, long time ago, put out elements of what constitutes an effective compliance program. And compliance teams have, for what feel like eons now, been constructing these compliance programs around anti-bribery, around money laundering, around all of the risk that we have managed historically as companies. They include all of the things that you would want to include in an effective AI governance program. So yes, you do have to first assess your risk and figure out what you're even trying to solve for. That's something that you do with any compliance program. You need to have policies and procedures to address and manage and mitigate those risks. Training and communication, you mentioned already. Third-party risk management, so what do we do with our vendors? And then monitoring and remediation to figure out whether it's working or not, and then have a feedback loop, again, to risk assessment. So back to the basics, I think, is one thing that it's really important to keep in mind when you're building a program.
Yeah, I completely agree. I want to go back to an earlier point that, Timur, you were making with respect to AI helping with governing. So thinking about this, if you have the AI that you're trying to govern helping with governance, isn't that basically having the foxes in the hen house? Like, how do you square that?
Yeah. So just thinking about it as another use case, right? Policy enforcement being a use case. And what does that mean? So what you can and cannot do. So let's start with maybe vendor contracts, right? So, because it's not just the policy that you have to follow, but I assume you're all looking at your policy and that your governance that your vendors have to follow as well, right? So every change that comes through a tool, does it actually have that update in their potential contract or their new, the new SOW, the order form that comes through? Well, if I have to go and read all 1,000 of those personally, that's going to take a good amount of time, right? So is my AI enablement there, that immediate extraction of that information, and then comparing that to my policy, and then giving me a yes, no, maybe answer? And that could be a way to just generally speed up this entire, like, are we actually doing the things that we say we're doing, and are our vendors doing the things that we say we're doing?
Makes sense. I'd love to see how it plays out in practice, but that makes a lot of sense. So we've kind of progressed through sort of what it is, talking a bit about how to build it, but I keep going back to this other question of what is good? What is good governance? How do you define that? What should define it? Big questions, hard to cover in a quick session like this, but I would love to hear your basic thoughts on how you react and kind of view those questions in the context of what we've been talking about.
From a technical perspective, I think good governance means when you are conducting that monitoring and auditing, you're finding things that are on the fringes, not the anticipated misses, not blatant violations of the policy. That means you've probably nailed it in terms of your risk assessment, in terms of the policy that you've created, and especially in terms of the training and communication. It means that people are probably getting it. From a less technical and a more just kind of relational perspective, I think it's when you start getting invited to meetings that you're not typically invited to. When people want you at the table because they know it's the right thing to do, and they also know you're going to help them figure out how to do it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think about it as, are your people doing the things that you want them to do when you're not looking? I think that's a really key piece. And then when that inevitable change comes, when you're going from one workflow to maybe an agentic framework, right? Like, does your framework still hold water, or is it a complete rewrite at that point, right? So are you flexible? Are you durable in that component as well? Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. So putting all this together, assuming, you've got different organizations represented in the audience in terms of sophistication. Some are large, some are smaller, some are really small, different sectors of the market, what have you. What's your advice for them, generally, with respect to working on this as a priority, given that AI is here, it's not going anywhere, it's continuing to embed itself in every part of our life, personally and otherwise? How would you advise them, knowing that they come from of so many different backgrounds and challenges and businesses?
Yeah, I think I go back to what I was saying, start somewhere, right? And it doesn't have to be from scratch. So I look at it as, if you're starting small, look at those one or two workflows and those outcomes and work backwards. What is the outcome that I'm trying to deliver? What is the data that's involved in this? And what's the blast radius if this goes wrong? And at that point, you can start to open the aperture of, well, how much do I want AI to actually enable this workflow? Is it just summarize this first piece, or is it summarize and then make a decision and then send it somewhere else as well? And that'll start to give you a good framework of what is it that I want AI to do in other types of workflows, right? Where does it live? Where do I want that human in the loop component of it? And what risk am I generally okay with it getting slightly wrong versus maybe this is a regulatory filing, it can never get wrong. So I'd start there.
Yeah. I would start with the elephant in the room, I think, probably when you're dealing with attorneys a lot of times, is they're risk averse. They're very conservative. A lot of times they aren't necessarily early adopters of technology. I think we are probably the exception to the rule. I'm always one of the ones to want to run and try it first. But you've got to figure out how to address that risk if you want people to actually adopt it once you get the framework in place. And that's really where things, I think, start to fall apart, is you can put all of the governance in place, you can, create and make available all of these really, really fancy tools, but if you don't explain to the attorneys and the legal ops professionals why it's okay and why it's safe to use them, they're not going to use them.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a really smart approach. So this may not have been necessarily part of the session, but I feel like it might be helpful to open it up to a few questions if anyone has a question. Don't want to put anyone on the spot here, but we've been laying out some principles. If any of you have a question, I would love to hear it. I will come down and provide the microphone.
Or we can repeat it. Yeah.
Or we can repeat it, yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm in-house counsel and I'm the one reviewing all the documents from vendors. So I'm curious if you have any tips for vendor compliance, because if it doesn't come out naturally through the contract negotiation process, we're trying to think of other ways to perform a gap analysis for vendors using AI that we don't know about so that we can proactively go get them to agree to our terms about how they use our data. Thank you.
I love that question because in addition to my role with respect to AI governance, I also am a commercial attorney. And so I do contracting every day, and I see that gap between the indemnities that you get vendors to agree to and the insurance that they have and their, what they say about outputs and training and what my InfoSec team is telling me. And a lot of times, these SaaS tools, they're proprietary. They're not going to open up, too much from a proprietary information perspective. So unfortunately, the answer I have is there's some trust involved. And I think in the AI space, it makes it even more important than it's ever been to make sure that you're using really reputable vendors that have staying power and that have history and that have demonstrated that you can trust them. This is not a space where you want to necessarily go with the cheapest tool just to save cost.
Can I want to add something? I would just add that I think when you're looking at vendors and speaking as someone who's GC of a vendor, for better or for worse, I think that one way to look at and evaluate a vendor is look at their terms on their website, see how robust they are, see what they're focused on, see when they were last updated, see if they're addressing AI at all. I mean, for me personally, when I'm dealing with someone much larger than myself, I'm looking at their agreement, and if they have AI terms, I'm like, okay, they understand, they're getting it, and that's informative for me to know, okay, what should I be focusing on as well? So that would be something I would throw out there.
I'd also just go from a bottoms-up approach. Your users, and what are they actually using the tool for versus what your vendor sold you a year or two ago and what the terms said? Because that's when that random little feature that, oh, hey, by the way, we just made a quick upgrade, and now we're using the Ask AI feature, and you had no idea that existed, right? So that is the bottom-up approach where we've started to go to all of our end users and say, okay, let's show me what it's doing, and then we have to have a conversation. I can't always catch it on the front end. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question if anyone has a question. Oh, well, then we've done our jobs, apparently. But any closing thoughts from either one of you?
I just love the idea of legal ops really getting more involved in AI governance. When I talked at the beginning of the presentation, I talked a lot about, we saw popcorn AI governance committees kind of being set up throughout the organization. And for one of the, in my humble opinion, highest risk departments or business units within the enterprise using AI, I think having a home within legal ops makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'd echo that. This is one of the first times I think legal has had the opportunity to not only set the policy across, but then also be real heavy users of that entire policy and the tools and get to own really the narrative around how AI is going to happen in the enterprise. I think that's one. The other one, I know it's a bit cheesy, but if we're going from walking to cars to airplanes, like where we're going, we don't need roads, maybe a component, so we have to build for that future. And I think maybe most importantly, out of everything, I think the happy hour is now open. So that is also a good takeaway.
That is definitely. By the way, was that a Back to the Future reference you just made there? We
Yes,
don't
it
need
was.
roads.
Yes.
Yes, I figured as much. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming. And please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any further questions, but thanks.